Okay, so just looking now at the policies and standards special interest groups. So this area is being led by Brussels Environment, and these contributing partners. BRE is one of the contributing partners. And I suppose it may seem a bit odd that we're looking at policies and standards as part of a research project. But actually, a lot of the things that we want to do in terms of moving from research and development into actual application in the built environment, does require, to a certain extent, some rethinking of certain policies and standards. So this is actually quite a key action to make sure that we don't just do the work and then find that there's, some either big enablers that we haven't recognised, or there's some big barriers that we haven't been able to identify. So it's a really key part of making sure that everything we do could eventually be exploited and applied in reality. So the aims are really to understand the current landscape in terms of what are the policies and the standards in particular that could influence the ability for the outcomes and the outputs of BAMB to be taken up, in reality. And they could actually be an enabler, but it could also potentially be a barrier as well. So it's really to understand the context in terms of the impact on what we're doing within BAMB, but then the wider impact in terms of things like waste reduction, resource optimization, and then just properly get to the bottom of all these different issues and understand them in more detail. So because obviously the European Union is quite a big place, so we can't really look at everything. So there will be a European Union level context that we'll look at, but then in order to make sure we don't miss the refinement of how some of these policies and standards are implemented on a national scale and a regional scale, we're going to look in more detail, particularly in these 4 countries, so Sweden, UK, Belgium and Portugal. And I think it's important to understand these 4 countries. We'll go into more detail because obviously if you're a stakeholder from one of those countries, then there could be specific opportunities to consult and get involved with the information captured there. So the key tasks, so obviously we want to get the special interest group up and running, and today is the start of that process to make sure people understand what we're doing, and if it is a particular area they want to get involved with, you know what's going to be happening and you can understand how to get involved. But the task that's actually going on at the moment is to map the current policies and standards across the EU at a national level in those 4 countries and at a regional level, but also looking at it from a wide perspective. So we are looking at public and private sector. So, for example, things like having a CSR policy that could influence reversible buildings or material passports, that could actually be quite a key driver in the future to making some of the concepts we're talking about reality. So we really just want to understand the landscape. And then we're then going to be doing an impact assessment of some of the key policies and standards that come to the fore in terms of either being potentially a really great avenue to exploit or potentially hampering some of the exploitation we're seeing. And then having identified that, go into it in more detail to say, well, how do we enhance the opportunities and maybe how do we address some of the barriers that come up with. So this is just having done that evaluation, looked at the impacts, looked at potentially ways in which we could enhance or reduce the impact. Then we're going to be drafting a framework, particularly in relation to regulations and standards. And this is just an example of some of the institutions and some of the ways in which standards are either addressed at an international level, at a European level, but also at a national level. And I'm sure because everybody here is associated somehow with the built environment, you can recognise that there's regulations and there's standards at different levels, at a product level, a building level, and at an operational level that could be relevant to the subject areas that we're talking about today. So really understanding that landscape and then drafting a framework whereby we feel that we can optimise the current landscape and maybe seek to amend some aspects as well. But obviously we won't be in a position to amend it. All we'll be able to do is make recommendations. And then also really important is raising awareness. And I think this becomes part of the whole way of how do you influence potentially changing some policies or adapting some policies is through the awareness raising, education and training, because we won't be in a position to make those amendments. But what we can do is present information in a way that will actually enable those that are in a position to make those changes, to have the evidence and to have the understanding to see, you know, where they can actually take things forward. So what are the opportunities for stakeholders? So there is a policies and standards special interest group. So if it's an area that's particularly relevant to you, I would really, you know, suggest that you get involved with that. We will be asking people to get involved with the mapping and with the impact assessment, and the mechanisms whereby we'll be doing that is through consultations, but we'll also be having workshops and webinars. So very quick oversight of this particular special interest group, and if you want to get involved, join the stakeholder network, join the special interest group, and you will get more information in the near future. Thank you.